This is possibly the most sensitive episode yet, where I discuss spirituality, community, and loss with Austin. I hope you enjoy.
Austin, welcome, my man.
So excited to be
Thank you so much to come here.
Of course.
I'm stoked.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, of course, man. So I have a question for you. When it comes to spirituality, I know there's a connection. The more entrepreneurs I meet, the more people who are taking life into their own hands and making their own future, right? I see a huge spiritual connection. Spirituality is it's a prominent aspect in their life. So what are your thoughts? What are your experiences on this? I have a feeling you have some interesting ones.
Yeah, on like spirituality.
Yeah.
Broad stroke.
Yeah.
I think with anyone's experience, it's their own. So I kind of have to start from like my own experience probably with that. At least in terms of like how I was raised, how I saw the world, and then kind of how that's like changed over time as well. And I think I've gone through really interesting kind of ups and downs with that relationship and that experience, and I've learned to appreciate a lot more that I probably was critical of for a pretty significant amount of time, because I saw the value that it had in my family's life, in my friends' lives, in my own life, while also being comfortable with the change, and knowing that like when you're being reflective, when you're processing your childhood, when you're thinking about your experiences, the people that you've met in the world, so much of who we are changes. We change how we see the world. We change how we, what we buy, why we buy it, who we have relationships with, our friendships, our opportunities, our careers. So many of those things like shift over time. So I think like if I look back into my childhood, I was raised in a pretty evangelical environment in the South. I was raised in Memphis, Tennessee, which is an amazing city. I have so much that I'm grateful for from where I was raised, and the worldview that it kind of created, which formed this foundational spirituality that began in the church, but also like in time was able to see so many perspectives from like a spirituality that was rooted in Christianity. And even beyond that, like early on, I think one of the key things that comes to my mind that was a part of spiritual life for how we were raised as children was rooted in community. And that was really at the heart of so much of what we experienced. Was here is a space like for spiritual practice, and this is like what's existing in that space. And what that was like friendships, relationships. There's so much, I think, in my early life, I should say, where I experienced that. And that was so key to creating kind of this baseline perspective of what it meant to have deep friendships, which I think is a huge component of who we are, both as individuals and how we exist in the world. So I think like that kind of created this foundation of a spiritual perspective of what do I believe, why. Like I also like started in existentialism. Why,
my favorite question
by far. And purpose and existence, and I really like that too. Like I of course appreciated the history and the more specific components of, say, the Bible. But I think that I began in time in my life to understand that like I really appreciated the perspective that the spiritual components of faith kind of created for me to see the world of like, okay, why with those questions, existentialism, like saying what are we here for? What is our purpose? What is our value? And I think that then began to define, and for me, defined so much about where I headed. And all of this was happening too in my like adolescence. So I was being initially like engaged with these things, and a lot of that was due to where I went to school. I was really grateful that we had amazing teachers who were very invested in us, like, and had true relationships, like, as mentors and guidance. And we were taught like philosophy. I remember in 7th grade, we were taught Beowulf, and we were taught
in 7th grade.
It was awesome. We're reading things like the Iliad and like stuff like that, where we were like,
so
we were being guided to look at like classic pieces of work and then kind of break those apart. And in a lot of that stuff, especially rooted in like philosophy and things like that, you're of course stumbling right on existentialism, and you're having to say like, what does all this mean? And I think the freedom to explore what a lot of those things mean began to define my spirituality, and find purpose. I think a lot of the underlying pieces where I personally find purpose in life has to do with the human connection. That is like such a big piece to me. And it has been, I think it has been forever. I think it took a lot of reflection, processing, therapy, like all these things to get to the heart of what do I value? Who am I? And what do I want to be a part of during my life? And knowing too that life is finite from what we know, and what we can be completely sure of. Obviously what happens in death is like a topic for like,
that's a fun
wild
topic.
discussion and endless, thought. But I think that
reading a lot about that this morning.
I think that when it comes down to spirituality, like the core of who I am as a spiritual person is finding meaningful connection with other people. And that's looked like so many things, from my friendships to intimate relationships, to professional relationships. And I'm extremely grateful for the people that I've met, the people I've been mentored by, the people that I've been able to mentor in like small ways, I hope. And just creating some degree of influence, I think, surrounding why people are important. And a lot of that is rooted in what I've at least been able to learn about empathy, and our ability to connect with people on a level that makes us approachable, makes us kind, thoughtful. And I think in that, we're able to then more deeply connect with everyone. It doesn't matter where you were raised, who you are, what you believe, what color skin you have, what language you speak. Those are all barriers at times, or things that we have to like navigate through to get on the same page. But like ultimately when we approach people, I think with an empathetic mindset, and we are approachable people ourselves, I think that invites a degree of vulnerability. I think it invites a degree of openness, communication, and just building relationship. Cool.
So from everything you're saying, it seems like there seems to be this disconnect. Like a lot of people assume spirituality is connected with religion, but from what I'm hearing, it seems like you think that spirituality is more connected with a relationship than with religion, and people could find that spirituality through like a healthy relationship, which is a lot of the vulnerability, empathy, a lot of things that you talked about.
Yes, kind of.
Okay. Okay, I love this. Okay.
I think what I would say on the front end of that is we are all individuals. And I think that needs to be a core part of our identity. Doesn't mean that we're not sharing in partnership, whether that's an intimate relationship or friendship or family. But I think that individualism, and I want to make this clear, like when I say individualism, I also don't mean like we are the ultimate us.
Okay.
Blah.
I was actually
like,
going to ask. Okay.
Yeah, like I just don't like, I'm not too fixated on solving the problem of who is the ultimate and what is this and having it exactly right. I think that makes people go crazy. I feel like it's made me go crazy a little bit, trying to like get that deep to say like what is ultimate individualism, where, you know, or like who is God exactly? What is God? What is the universe? Like, it's like, yes, okay, like those are exciting things to think about, but like I'm a pretty practical person, so I need things that I can like apply and do to feel value and feel like I'm enjoying and happy with what I'm doing. So I think like when I think about spirituality in relationship, spirituality in regard to a faith or a religion, I would say like in my experience of the people that I've met in the world, anyone I've met who identifies with a religion is a spiritual person. Doesn't mean like, are there also like extremes on that? Absolutely. But spirituality can be and is a component of religion. Most people who practice, I mean, a spectrum of religion in the world, like, are deeply spiritual people. I think that, like, in my experience with who I am, when I think about faith and when I think about spirituality, I think one of the ways that we can exist in our spirituality is through human relationship. I wouldn't say that it necessarily defines, I wouldn't say actually that it's defined by relationship, because I think we are individuals. So I think that it's important too that like we as individuals have an identity that is deeply connected to how we see the world and how we want to experience the world and how we can be impactful, loving, kind, approachable. And also, like, it's not also all just like love and peace. Like, relationships are messy, humanity is messy. We have to take into account the reality of like the fact that like no one's perfect, and like we don't get things right, and we make mistakes, and we hurt each other, and sometimes we have experiences from the past and trauma. We have all these experiences that we collect right from the moment that our minds are in existence that inevitably impact who we are. And I think that it would be really reckless to not take those things into consideration when we look at people in the world. Where were we born? How were we raised? What influences were there? How are we supported? Did we, in what sort of family did we grow up in? Where? What did we have? What did we not have? And I think so many of those environmental components are so critical to looking at people in the world and understanding that like there isn't one way that was right. There are many ways though that people have been affected by really difficult things. And I think we have to take those into account when we look at the world and when we individualize and when we consider who we are as individuals. I think reflection is a really valuable practice, is what I would say. Because at least for my experience in who I feel like I am as a person, my ability to stop and to think not just about a circumstance or an exact time, but like go through patterns, understand how I communicated, think about who that affected, decisions that I made about my education or my professional life or relationships with my family members, just like to really go back and like deeply, and I think there's like an important thing to say here too, like the majority of the world on a daily basis is trying to survive. So in a way, I do want to like separate, like I feel very grateful that I can even have the time and space to reflect. From my experience in the world and the people that I've met and people that I've worked with in developing countries, in places in East Africa and places in Central America, certain places all over the United States, people that I've interacted with on all levels of society anywhere I've ever been in the world. So many people are just trying to survive. They're trying to make ends meet. They're trying to cover rent. They're trying to be able to pay for medical bills. They're trying to eat. And so it is a luxury to be reflective, in my opinion, and it doesn't mean that I should not do it just because I have the luxury of doing it. I think that I have found personal value in being reflective, and I think that that is something that's ultimately created my perspective on who I am as a spiritual being, how that relates to other people, and how I want to relate to everyone as I interact with people. From that goes from like all levels of society, whether you're like checking out at the grocery store or in a like transactional business relationship, or you're like doing something for fun. Like all of those things begin to influence kind of how we interact with people. Sorry, I'm probably a little off track, but
no, this is actually really great.
Okay.
And it brings up a interesting question that I've been thinking about for a while, and it's about community.
Cool.
I love community. I think it's incredibly important, personally. I have found so much personal growth through community, to be able to have someone there in that's close enough to you that can call you out on all your crap and be like, okay, dude, you fucked up here. This was wrong. You need to change here. And someone else that isn't, to go right along with that, someone who's not just there to do that, but also there to encourage you. And when you're down and when you're depressed and when everything is falling out, to be like, yo, dude, I got your back. Like, you're going to get through this. We got this. And having that balance. And a lot of what you're talking about, I personally have found through different communities that I've intentionally developed, intentionally placed myself in. And one reason why I love Colorado, why I love being here, is because people like you, people like my brother, people like Justin Ray, Cole was even actually really great. Like, and I just met the kid. Like, you guys have a really incredible community here, and it's absolutely gorgeous. So have you been in the habit of like developing these communities, or have you just more found yourself because of who you are, that these communities are kind of attracted to you, or how has that been for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great, I mean, I would say like kind of even what I touched on before with like how I was raised in the church, and we were very much like, I feel like community was such a key piece to that, because like you developed your friendships, you had friends you met in school, but you also went to church and you saw each other on weekends, and you had parties together, and you just like had all of these things that began to kind of cycle. And I think that depending on where people are and what people are interested in, like geographically speaking, like sometimes that can be really tough on people, finding and developing community. Trust is a huge part of that. And I think developing trust, for me and my experience with that with my friends, probably started in like early, I mean, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade was probably the foundational side, because my friends and I made between 4th grade and 7th grade are still to this day relationships that I have in my life. And I mean, my friend Christian, my friend Brett, my friend Rob, like these relationships, and some of those didn't forge until high school, and really became like, obviously we were like becoming like people. We were like busy, you know, having like going through puberty and like
just that small thing.
Like discovering like consciousness, and like just being like, oh, decisions matter and there are consequences, and you know, like all these like basic things. But like we were developing those friendships, and like I think honestly, like one of the things that I like that comes to mind in early community is with my friend Christian, who, God, we had to have met in 3rd grade, and then his family moved away, so we were good friends, and he moved away for several years. He lived in Germany, and we kept in touch on AOL Instant Messenger. Classic. And it was awesome. We still, I can't remember his full screen name, but it was El Nino something. And like I think about like the times where we'd like have to connect to a 56K modem and
Yes.
and like all the noises are happening, and then like we'd be on and we'd like get to chat, and he was in Germany and I was in the US, and so we had this time between like when we could talk, but we would like just find ways of like, hey, what's up, man, how's it going, what are you doing? And we did that for several years. And then the day after he flew back to the US to move home, I went and saw him. And I still remember visually the house that I went to. His family had come in town and they were staying with friends. I remember like going to it, like seeing him at the door, and then it was just like we had maintained and built a relationship with what we had, which was critical for our relationship as friends.
Yeah.
We had AOL Instant Messenger. And that was it. We were like, what? I don't know how old you are. We were young.
Yeah.
And we couldn't just like get on a plane and go visit each other. And so like from that moment on, we had this just deep friendship that was always there. And we had friendships with other people like that. My friend Doug comes to mind from the same time. And those relationships were just forged. And like one of the things that like I think really is so key to those relationships is we spent time together. That's what it was. Physical time together. So like go to each other's homes, go out to do things. We ran around in the woods a lot because we just liked being outside. Like we just really enjoyed conversations, talking about things, exploring like as we like started dating and doing other things, like we shared those things with each other. Like we were very open with each other in trust, openness, vulnerability, being compassionate, being patient, being forgiving. I think some of those things created like the foundational perspective on how to build community. And those experiences to me were so critical with developing ongoing communities. I also had an experience after high school. I went to this, it's an independent study school in Switzerland called LaBrie, and it's an intentional community where you work half of the day on things like making meals for everyone or keeping the grounds, whatever that may be, projects here and there. And then you study half of the day independently, whatever you want to study, spirituality, whether it's something that would be tied to like a religion, or philosophy, all the way down to people getting into like nitty gritty pieces of like theology and things like that. But it was so neat because it's like 30 people in a chalet in Switzerland, small little village. And so you're just like, I think that was also this really unique kind of training of like, well, I haven't really lived this close to this many people except for my family in a house. This is interesting. Like, and you just like begin to share and you begin to like learn boundaries, know what you need, know what to ask for. I think communication is such a big piece of that too.
So how has that, like going through those experiences, learning how to develop that community, develop those relationships, now how has that affected you like to this day in like a slightly different realm, in your like professional realm? Because I have a feeling there's connected, but and I know personally for me it's affected, but how has it affected you?
Professionally, like building community in like professional life. I think that has differed a lot based on the environment I've been in for work.
Okay.
I mean, for the last 4 years, I worked independently as a consultant and an entrepreneur, and I think that I think it's critical to have a like-minded community in that because there are a lot of ups and downs. And I think having professional community, I guess like for some people too, like some people I know like definitively separate those things. It's like, here's my professional life and the people in it. Here's my personal life and the people in it. I feel grateful that those things for me have like intertwined and overlapped. I think some people probably hate that. I don't. I'm so grateful. I mean, what brought me to Colorado, I'd been in the Northwest for almost 9 years, and I wanted to be closer to family. I'm originally from Tennessee, and I had clients here, your brother and Justin being two of them, and I had experienced this friendship in Colorado. The way that friendship came to be is kind of its own story. In that this would have been 3 years ago from August. 2 years ago? I think 2 years ago.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh,
Let me get that right timeline-wise. So yeah, 2 years ago, August. My best Christian, who I talked about earlier, his mom called when one of our friends died very suddenly. And he took his own life, and that was very tragic, and really tough. In that, found out, so it was kind of get home, be there for family, for friends, mourn together, celebrate his life, in process, kind of what we're going through. So went home, we all kind of convened back in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where he lived and where several of us had lived before. And in doing so, I reconnected with a friend, Hannah, who lives here, married to our friend Tim. And Hannah and I had seen each other at the funeral. We'd known each other in college. I was also there with my friend Mason. And we were sitting around one night, kind of processing. We stayed for several days. Obviously, when the sudden death comes of a very close friend. And Ryan wasn't just, he was a friend of mine, but he was also, I felt like a mentor to him. Christian was a mentor to him, but he was our friend. We were friends. And it was we had such deep relationships. He came to visit me in Portland. He came to visit me in Seattle. We had years and years together. And he was one of the most incredible people in the world. So giving of his time. He started a wilderness therapy program to help students kind of process and heal from their experiences. Was taking kids who had never been into the wilderness. Really neat individual. But with his loss came a lot of us getting together as friends and community and healing together. I made incredible friendships through that healing process. In that, I met Hannah again. Well, I didn't meet Hannah. We reconnected from college, and she just said, "Hey, I had some pretty neat friends in Colorado." We were kind of all sitting around one night by a fire after, and it was me and Mason and Hannah, and another friend. And we were just talking, and I was like, "Yeah, I don't really feel like I can go back home right away. This is really heavy to me." And Hannah was like, "Hey, I have such an amazing group of friends in Colorado. On your return to Washington, why don't you fly to Colorado?" So I did. And it's just was not a hard decision to make. And we had all booked one-way tickets, just went home with kind of an unknown return date for all of our stuff. And grateful that we also had the freedom and flexibility to do that with our professional lives and be together. And so in doing so, I came to Colorado just as great, I'll meet some new friends, do this stuff. I met your brother. I met Justin. I met sorry.
Do it.
So I think we were talking about kind of how I initially got introduced to people in Colorado, which was through my friend Hannah. Came through on a trip. We had lost our friend Ryan, kind of processing and healing from that. Had all kind of reconvened in Chattanooga, Tennessee, for the funeral and for the process. And when I came here, it was to get rest. That was kind of something that I had wanted to focus on. I didn't really anticipate building the friendships that I would. And built those friendships, made some clients in the process for my work. I had a video production company at the time. We had signed a contract with Rome here in Colorado, built those relationships out of that. And it was we had talked about oh, well, what are we working on? Oh, you're an entrepreneur. What do you do? I do this. We need that. Great. Let's do it. And so it worked out really well, but it was really neat because that was one of the early processes for me in what we were talking about before, kind of meshing professional life and personal life to like these people that I met, that I just met one time on one trip for a couple of days, and like stayed in this duplex with, you know, my friend Hannah lived there, and she was on one side with two of our other friends, and then three of their friends lived on the other side of that duplex in this house. And it's like, but it's people are working professionals and have their careers and have done their stuff, and it was just this really neat environment that I've seen before and I've experienced before, but this was like a new stage in life, and especially for me. I was so fearful of stepping away from full-time work to work on my own. I was so scared. I was like, how do people become consultants? What does that mean? Like, how do you do that? How do you start a business yourself? How do people have the money for that? How do people handle this risk of doing these things?
There's a lot of fears that come with it.
So much. And in that one experience with just visiting Colorado and meeting new friends and picking up some new clients, it was so meaningful to me because I was in a like-minded community of people who knew how all of that felt. And or they were feeling it at the time, or not knowing then, but down the road over the next year or two would feel it later. And we just built this cool friendship. It was awesome. And I had just moved out to a small town in central Washington. I bought a really old house. I had always wanted to fix up an old house, so I bought like a 110-year-old house in the middle of this town of 2,000 people, Clay Ellen, Washington. It's awesome town. It's beautiful. The people there are like, talk about community. I mean, that like my experience with like living in a rural town, the immediate community, my neighbors were generational families. I met all these business owners, small community in the mountains, incredible people, like incredible people. And those are my foundational clients for being an entrepreneur. And they, regardless of whether they know that or not, like from every photo job for making a couple $100 for shooting photos to, you know, my first like 10,000 plus contract as a production company was all there. And so it was like very, very formidable for who I became as an entrepreneur and who I wanted to become as a consultant and help small businesses and help nonprofits. And the community I built in Colorado really ushered that forward. And then it began to mesh even deeper because I maintained these relationships here. And I spent a couple years in Washington in that town, got some things launched, started the media production company with my friend Travis. We hired our friend Ryan, we hired our friend Kate. We had this like cool team that would collaborate on projects, and we were doing stuff out of the house. I was able to work on my house, which had always been a dream of mine. I like gutted the kitchen, and my friend Doug, who was actually just speaking to yesterday, he lives in Copenhagen now. He's an architect and designer. He helped me redesign my kitchen through his master's process. And it was actually with him, with Doug, that I stumbled on this town. I was living in Seattle at the time, and we had been out in kind of eastern part of Washington for a project for Doug. He was getting his master's in architecture, and so he was designing his thesis project. So he had to pick a site. So he actually picked the Hanford Site. Have you ever heard of the Hanford Site? No. The Hanford Site has a bleak history of processing. I'm not a nuclear scientist, so I'm not going to get this right. But basically, processing uranium to be used for the atom bomb, I believe, was at the Hanford Site. And I believe that it was where the uranium was enriched for the bombs that we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which is extremely tragic and a very bleak, obviously part of our history. But it's a desolate site with, I'm going to get this wrong, but it's somewhere between like 6 and 10 former sites. So you can like, you go out and it's like vast. And they're all like filled in, covered with concrete. And so he picked that site as his site to design his architectural thesis project.
Interesting.
Which was an agave processing plant is what he designed. It's awesome. Doug's
Hilarious.
brilliant.
Okay.
It's so cool. Like, I wish I had like the images from when he drew this, because it's like so brilliant. It was so unique and so cool. So I went out with him to shoot photographs of the landscape, so he could bring those photographs in and then design his plant into those photographs on that site. He was kind of using a gravity design for the plant to process. Really brilliant. Doug's mind is incredible. So we were coming back from that trip, actually, and I think this is relevant to your question about community and professional life, because this was also when I had lived alone for several years and had ended up moving into a house in Seattle, in Green Lake, and Doug was one of my housemates. Developed this awesome friendship, and he's like such a neat guy. And he was actually transitioning out when I moved in, but we became friends before, and then I ended up moving into the house that he lived in with a couple of friends, and kind of started building some like community at the adult level of like professional life and things like that. And so we built this relationship, and he was kind of wrapping up, and he was like making plans to move overseas when he finished school. He was doing this last project. He said, "Hey, will you come out with me and photograph this site, and would love to use your images to design my thesis project." And I was like, honored, of course. That's awesome. Would love to, of course, duh. So, and I've been a photographer. Like, photography is so important to me, and I love it. In any way that I can like use that to help people, I'm like, oh, of course, like happily do that. And so we go out, and we're on the trip back to Seattle, and we had stayed in this town in Washington. Ellensburg is the name of the town. And when we had stayed, we got an Airbnb, and the woman who owned the Airbnb had said, "Hey, have you guys ever been to Rosslyn or Clay Elum?" We're like, "No." Well, Rosslyn has the oldest bar in Washington. You guys should go for lunch on the way back. And I was like, that sounds awesome. And you go in, and it's called the bar is called The Brick. It was formerly the jail in the town. The town was established in the late 1880s, I believe, or early 1880s. You walk in, and there's still like a spittoon running below the bar, like where you would spit.
Yeah.
And it's like water flowing. There's still like, it's amazing. Like the building, everything's like still there, very intact. The little town is incredible. Roslyn, Washington. It's an amazing place. It's also like the setting, like I know there was a show in the, I want to say it was like 80s. I don't know if it only ran in the 80s, called Northern Exposure. And like one of the intro scenes, like I guess one of the shots in the intro of the show was shot in Roslyn.
Interesting.
Dick Van Dyke filmed a movie in Roslyn. Roslyn has such neat history. These were old coal towns. So the economy, the local economy there was really birthed out of the timber industry and the coal industry. And so, obviously we're many decades from when those economies were established. We got there, it's like a beautiful like fall day. No, it was in the spring. That's wrong.
Yeah.
It was a spring day. I want to say it was in March or May.
Okay.
And we got in, had lunch, and we walked around this little town. And Roslyn, I think, has about 800 or 900 residents, I want to say. And it was such a beautiful little town. And there was, we ate lunch at the Brick, and we walked through kind of the neighborhood around the corner. And there was a particular experience that I had. We go to walk, and there's a guy's house, and he had horses like in his yard of his house. Like it was like probably half-acre lot. We just like walked over, and I was just like petting horses in this guy's like front yard in this town. And I was like, this town is incredible. This place is incredible. And I hadn't really like, at this point, I was like, yeah, I really love the mountains. I had spent some time in the mountains before that, and I hadn't spent a lot of time in the mountains in the Northwest. I'd like go out with some friends, do things here and there, but I was mostly just working and lived in the city. Yeah. And in that moment of being there and kind of having those experiences with Doug and having lunch and seeing these cool towns and this history, and it was only about an hour and a half from Seattle, I just like fell in love with it.
Yeah.
I was like, I love what I'm experiencing and feeling when I'm in this town and in this place right now. Like I was very present. And I think, you know, part of mine and Doug's conversations during that trip had kind of prompted some of those things. And it was a time in life for me where I was like really questioning a lot about my professional life, and I was enjoying what I was doing, but I wasn't fulfilled and fully happy about where I was headed. And 3 weeks later, I bought a house there.
Wow.
And like got really intense about, was like, oh, I'm gonna buy a house here. Like I love this place, and this is probably kind of crazy. And I think some of my friends thought I was crazy for like being in Seattle, growing city, lots of stuff going on, lots of opportunity, and it's such a beautiful place. I bought this old house that I knew I would redo. Doug helped me do that, and that was all such a process for me because, like, I mean, I didn't think I'd ever be able to buy a house.
Yeah.
I mean, how like in college and after college, I was poor. I didn't have any money. I didn't have anything. It was like, oh, I can afford to rent my $400 apartment in Memphis where I, you know, was in college and things like that. And it's like, how do people do this? I just like had gone through all these discovery processes and done things. And eventually I was kind of like, the only way I'm going to learn how to do something is if I just go do it. And if I just go figure it out myself. Like sometimes we're just not going to have people to tell us how to do things. And I was like nervous about doing that in general. It's new risk taking in life that I was like, should I do this right now? Is this like smart? What are all the risks? Like, oh my gosh, it's a house. But I think through that process and through creating some time, eventually I ended up moving out there full time, left the city, lived out there for 2 years. Or I guess I was there for like a year and a half. I was back and forth in the city for a year. It was cool. I got to use the house. I redid the kitchen. I redid the backyard. I built like an area of fire pit in the backyard. We had like one of the gnarliest winters ever. The first winter I was there, there was 3 feet of sitting snow for months, 4 months. It was awesome. I got snowed in several times, which was like a crazy experience for me to have. It was like, people don't get snowed in anymore. Like that's not a thing. And like, sure enough, find this town and move in. And I mean, I remember waking up several mornings in the winter with a foot of new snow, 2 feet of new snow, 3 feet of new snow. But I started having these experiences in that town, in that place, that I would have never had if I had stayed in the city.
Yeah.
A lot of those dealt with my experiences with nature, being able to leave my home, and I was like immediately in the woods. It was a beautiful place, rural, wooded. I mean, I don't know if you've ever like seen a photo of a larch tree, but larches right now in the fall season, they're an evergreen that turns bright yellow, like fluorescent
Interesting.
yellow. It's unbelievable. And then to gold. It's so beautiful. And then those are scattered among the evergreens in the area of the Northwest. I had elk come through my front yard.
That's
I had fruit trees
Yeah.
on at my house. Like I could pick plums, I could pick pears, I had rhubarb, my neighbors had apples, my neighbors had cherries. It was incredible. It was just like kind of this new experience for me, and being out there full time, being able to have local clients, work there, live there, and really settle into like a small community, I think really began to transform the way that I saw the world. Especially with one thing that was like big to me is I'd never lived anywhere that was like a more rural town or a small town in America. And this was shortly after the last election, which, like, without a shadow of a doubt, like, there was a lot of influence from rural communities and people who were frustrated with feeling run over by general political perspectives of large city and urban environments. And I felt that I really could, like, rural communities were very unrelatable to me. And that was kind of concerning because I felt like rural communities in America had a big voice in our last election, regardless of who voted for who, none of that. It was just like there's a voice here in a that I'm not familiar with, and that kind of bothered me, honestly. I felt kind of dumb. I was like, lived in cities most of my adult life. Most people criticize rural communities, but I haven't lived there.
Yeah.
I haven't lived in a rural community. How am I supposed to have an opinion about rural communities without living in the midst of a rural community? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So and I'll be honest, one of the greatest experiences of experiencing people who loved their neighbors.
So this is really interesting, because so when you said you moved out there, you said your friends thought you were crazy leaving.
Not all of them. I mean, I think people were more, but they weren't like, you're dumb or anything like that. I think it was just more of like, it's an hour and a half away.
Yeah.
It's out there. It's a small town.
Right.
You sure?
Leaving all like Seattle with all these opportunities,
Yeah.
going out to this rural community.
Yeah.
And like I've lived in many rural communities most of my life.
Okay.
I actually have been the opposite. I haven't been in many cities.
Okay.
And so have you seen, coming from a city then going to that rural community, did you see a priority shift from the career to more of a fulfillment thing? And how has that affected you?
Yeah, wow. It was the season that was happening. I think it was a season where I was questioning so much about the value in life, and what do we ultimately want in life? Like, what do we want? What do I want?
Hard questions.
They are hard, and I feel so lucky, truly lucky, again, that I even have the opportunity to ask myself that question, because so many people in this world are just working to survive.
Yeah.
And I have the opportunity to sit and ask myself that question, take some time. And in doing so, it doesn't mean that it's easy. But I think that I was like, kind of had a little bit of a freak out of like, what am I doing? Not that I hadn't had that before. I'd had that several times before. But I think I was
For someone like you who's really deep intellectual, that doesn't surprise me. Having that a lot of times.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think too, it was like more, I was like, instead of just like letting this like stew, I'm going to start taking action. I'm going to do stuff. I'm probably going to get a lot of things wrong, which I've gotten a lot of things wrong in my life. Endless amounts of things wrong. And I've done things poorly, and like I've hurt people have hurt me. I've had plenty of like relationships that didn't work out, like ebbs and flows and all of these things. But I think ultimately I was like, I now really want to start taking action.
Exactly. Without taking that action, nothing's going to happen.
No, it's not. And no one is going to do that for you. That was something that like really, the experience that I had was like, no one's going to do this for me.
It's funny. This is a whole season I was going through, like last year into the beginning of this year, right? When you and I first met, was going through this and realizing, you know what? Like life is going by. No matter what happens, what I do, life is going by whether I like it or not. And if I want to change it, I have to start taking the action, the specific steps that I want to create the life that I want, living with that intentionality, because no one else is going to do that for me.
100%.
That's a hard lesson to learn.
Oh, it's hard. It's scary.
Terrifying.
Yeah. And I mean, it means that you're going to take some risk.
I quit my full-time job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Huge risk, right?
Huge
scary,
risk.
Scary.
Terrifying.
And like, I think it's interesting too when people like, I mean, I know we're on a podcast, we're like talking about these things, and like, I'm sure there'll be a lot of feelings about things that we talk about in this.
Oh,
but like,
sure.
Like when people talk about that, it's like, oh, you have the luxury of like quitting your job, you have a safety net, you got this and that. Like you're on a podcast, and it's like, no, like there are many of us who don't have certain safety nets. And I think that is something that's like been a really important conversation with me and my friends who have to take certain risks, is understanding like, yeah, if I needed to like bail on everything and like could move back to one of my parents' houses, I could have a room in a parent's house. But like, when you're trying to say like, what life do I want, and what brings me joy, and what am I going to do to make that happen, and what can I do? What's actually in my control? That's a bigger part of the question.
Much bigger.
And I think that's something I learned through therapy and through processing and healing and reflection is. We have to learn to separate things in what is in our control, what is out of our control, and focus on what we can do with what's in our control. I'm not good at that necessarily, but I've just realized, and I've been taught that that's really important.
Yeah.
And we need to see the world that way.
Yeah.
At least if we want to be able to maybe maintain some degree of stability in our psychological state.
For real.
And
do you think not having a safety net has been helpful?
Yeah, in some ways. It's scary.
I know, it's terrifying.
But it is.
Yeah.
I think in some ways, I would say, to be more specific, in some ways it's helpful in that I feel like I've accomplished things on my own. In other ways, it's a total disaster.
Yeah.
And I've lost my shit so many times.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
for real. So, I think it's like, it's, I think, like, it's not that I have zero safety nets.
Yeah.
It's not that you have zero
Exactly.
safety nets. But I think that there's also a piece for people like you and I who we do want to be able to do things on our own. Like, and it doesn't mean that those decisions are easy, and it doesn't mean that certain safety nets exist.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could always fall back and have a room to stay in our parents' home. Sure, so like, okay, we can take certain risks, but like we also have things we want to achieve that take steps that we don't want to just say like, I'm constantly going to throw things to the wind and take all these risks. But that became a big process for me. Before I turned 30, I remember like, it's really funny, like I think in American culture with like having a decade transition, and your 20s are awesome. You come out of your teens and like becoming an adult now. Kind of, yeah. When we also understand that, like,
in theory,
our brains don't fully form until we're 25. There's a lot of pressure put on people in American society to understand things at like a certain age.
To make life-changing decisions at an age when your brain isn't fully developed.
Way too early.
So early, it's insane.
Yeah, it's crazy. And reckless. And I think like when I was coming into my 30s and everyone's like, well, you're getting old, 30s, and like the way people talk about things, and I've always been really bothered like when people talk about I'm old or you're old, like when people like, and I know it's like usually in like jest and people like having fun, but I just got what I feel like the perspective I gained from when I would see people doing that, it was kind of like it's kind of a neg. I don't know if you like know that term. I learned this term recently from Cole. Neg.
N-E-G?
Yeah, it's like a thing that you would say to someone that is kind of a criticism, but it's also kind of playful, but it is a criticism.
Yeah.
And I think like,
funny.
you're old is kind of like falls into that category. Yeah. And I think in time I was like, I don't really want to talk about being old. Like, I don't like that joke because I think it actually infiltrates people's psyche. I think it truly affects, like they say like, I am old, so I am this, or I am older and I can't do X. And it's not to say that there aren't like realities to that. Like, yes, after I go for a long bike ride, my knees hurt longer now because I am in my 30s and I've ridden bikes for a while. Yeah. Like, so like there are obviously physical and physiological things that come along with like progression.
But people put more limitations, unnecessary limitations.
They do, and I think that they put that on themselves by subscribing to I am old now, I can't do certain things. And obviously, like I said, people do that in a joking manner. Yeah. But when you're coming into your 30s, I feel like I heard a lot of people saying that to me. Oh, you're in your 30s, you're getting old, you're going to start having XX and X. And some of those things did take me by surprise, some of them didn't. But I set forth into my 30th year, and I had 3 things that I wanted to focus on eventually. I kind of narrowed it down. I had been seeing a therapist at this point too, and so I was like, I kind of want to narrow down some things to focus on for this transition. I'm not really going to buy into this whole I'm old yet thing. I've probably changed my tune on that a bit. But I do want to focus on finding more joy in my life and doing things that are fulfilling and make me happy and feel like I'm living a life that I'm excited about. And unfortunately, it's alliterative, which is embarrassing because so many people, 3 Ps, 4 Ts, like all these things, they all start with Rs, ironically. But it was rest, risk, and reflection. And those were the three things that I chose, and they're still a big part of my practice in life today.
I think in one of the first conversations I had with you, we talked about this.
Did we? Okay.
Yeah, these the three. I remember this specifically.
It's like sounds so dumb. Like I feel like if I've talked to people about that, and I hear that reiterated to me, I feel like a silly motivational speaker. Saying that,
no, honestly,
what it is.
You need to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it just became one of those things. I had been through a number of things by this time in my life, like. In my childhood, I'm very grateful for my childhood. I had a lot more stability than so many people have in their lives. But, I had been through normal things that have happened in American society. My parents were divorced. I had, relationships that I developed, friendships. Some were gained, some were lost. Went through my education. I accrued debt, got into my professional life, dated, married, got divorced, had existential crises about my professional life, changed.
This is a lot to go
through. It was like so many things are like building up to like, which to me, I began in this season of reflection to process a lot of those things, headed into being 30. And I just found that I had an opportunity to take time to really reflect and to process and to say, like, that's where the obviously reflection comes in with what I wanted to do in terms of like thinking about my past and thinking about people whose lives I had affected, whose lives had affected me, what I could do to improve myself and be a better friend, be a better partner, and then moved over to risk. What risks am I willing to take? What does risk mean to me? How do I take those risks? What are the factors there? Do safety nets exist for some of these risks? And rest was like key. That was like a big one.
I have the hardest time with that.
But most people do.
Yeah.
I still do.
Yeah.
After years out at this point, I turned 34 in about 7 months. And so I'm 4 years into all of this. I mean,
yeah.
The more we learn, the more we know we don't know, right?
Exactly.
So like, but I have developed a practice of rest and a focus, and I think that shifted through a lot of friendships and relationships and people talking about things that maybe they wanted to incorporate in their life, but they just didn't.
Yeah.
Or I'm starting to do this and I'm seeing a lot of benefit from it. And rest can be multiple things. Like I actually had a friend who was like really confused by, I was talking about doing backcountry skiing, which is we've talked about this like a little bit, but you have your skis, your snowboard, and you go up a mountain. It's hard. And one of my friends was asking me, like, what's that experience like? What do you enjoy about it? I was like, it's kind of peaceful. And they're like, it's peaceful? I'm like, yeah, it is. Like, for some reason, really hard exercise is very restful to me. I know that it's not everyone's thing, but I also have a lot of friends who are endurance athletes. And I think most of them find these Zen-like experiences through pushing their bodies really hard. Yeah. And that became restful for me. Just sitting on my ass. Yeah. I didn't do that a lot. Yeah. I'm an active person. I'm an overactive person. I can't sit still very much. I think that's why the practice of rest in sitting for long periods of time became necessary, because it was kind of a challenge to my identity. Which is when we get inundated with these things. Like I love my mom and she's awesome. One of the things that like she's always told me, which I think is good, but is like, yeah, you can't sit still like ever. That's true. And the narrative of I can't sit still means that I inundated that narrative to myself, where I said, okay, part of my identity is not sitting still. And she's right. And I also wanted to change that about who I was. And so I had to change that narrative. Because otherwise I would just tell them, oh, you have to be active.
That's a really difficult process.
Oh, it took me so many years. It took me years to just understand that, especially too, because my mom meant that it's a compliment.
Exactly.
It's like, yeah, this is who you are, and you're like antsy and like always got to be going. And it's cool because you do this, this, and this. And it's true. Flip that coin over, and it's yes, and I'm probably more exhausted, and I probably don't know myself well, and I've just subscribed to this identity, and I've let it roll. Yeah. So those challenges and those couple of things became very crucial for me in processing who I was, moving to a small community to do that. Like I was excited to leave the city through that process.
It's pretty dramatic.
It was very dramatic. Yeah, it felt a little odd. I mean, it felt like a big risk in and of itself. It also felt like a place that I could rest. It felt like a place that I could be reflective. I'm not really too keen, like, I think a lot of people get all jazzed about talking about, like, drugs that they do. I guess out of the blue, but cannabis to me was like a massive influence in moving me to reflection and processing and healing from a lot of things in my life. Sounds absurd. It's so recreational now. You know, it's just like, it's like going out and getting a drink to a lot of people. That wasn't what it was for me. Like I had smoked like a couple times in my life with my brother, who's a really important person in my life. We're very close. We usually we've walked around the cities he lived in and look at architecture and talk about really personal things and like connect deeply as we've like smoked together. And for me, I was able to use that process as something that was very new and was very healing and was very like, it helped me rest. It also helped me like work through a lot of things that I just did. We just, like a lot of people, like I said, with the majority of people in the world trying to survive, we're really just living. And oftentimes we don't have the luxury, and most people absolutely do not have the luxury of spending this much time in reflection. So I consider that to be, I'm extremely grateful that could be a part of my life in any form or fashion. And I think being willing to kind of get out of my comfort zone a little bit and smoke a little bit more, rest, think about the past, not to fixate on the past, but to process the past.
There's a difference there.
Yeah, and look and say, like, who was I? Who am I? Who do I want to be?
So 3 of the most important questions you can ask about yourself.
I think so. Like, and I think that there's not really a time that you like couldn't ask yourself that question, because you don't want to fixate on the past. Obviously, like, we can have a lot of things that are very difficult in our lives if we fixate too much or if we are overwhelmed by our past. Now, some people's past too are very overwhelming, and that was not of their own doing. People are victims of trauma and victims of difficult environments and circumstances. They didn't do that to themselves. That's a factor we have to take in when we talk about people's pasts and trauma and who people become and who they are. I think that when I began to process, I started looking at critical relationships in my life and what had those meant to me and what had I done about them and what was I doing about them. And that meant having some very direct conversations with some people. It also meant people that had been in my life in my past, like my ex-wife, who is an incredible person. She's amazing. And she's one of the most, like, oh my God, her like job, like, she's a therapist now. She takes care of students. She is an incredible person. We did not have a healthy relationship. But like in my time processing, it's like our relationship wasn't good, and we didn't work well together. But like as I began to process, it's like, but we're individuals too, and like I was like, oh my God, like, damn, I wish I could have that perspective then, to be more thoughtful, and not that we wouldn't have stayed together, but like to be more thoughtful about that process. And I think that like those things really caused me to be like, okay, like I'm thinking about this stuff now. It's part of my life now. I have an opportunity. I have an opportunity to like have these conversations with people and begin to work on things. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take probably forever, truly, till I die. Till they die, until we all die. But what if we have the ability of taking relationships from the past, focusing on the relationships that present themselves in the present and what present themselves in the future, and being better, being better communicators, being more transparent and vulnerable, building trust. And I think that like those experiences of moving to a small town building these intimate relationships with my neighbors too, who are like the most giving, kind people ever, initially being supported by a community as an entrepreneur and having opportunity to work and get paid for it. And all of these things were kind of happening simultaneously in that season of life. And I am so grateful for what it caused in me to have to go to some dark places and visit some things that I wasn't proud of, to say, how can I be better? Like, and how can I not only think about this, what can I do? Right? Very action oriented for that.
I feel like if you don't have that action oriented part, I know from my personal experience that I've gone through a lot, it's similar process. Like, if you don't have that action oriented, if you don't have, okay, what can I do from here on forward, then it's so much easier to just get fixated on that past and to take that victim mentality, and I am who I am because of what's happened to me, and therefore I'm stuck with who I am, instead of taking that step and saying, yes, that is part of who I am, that is a huge part of why I am the way that I am, but I can move forward with that. I don't have to only be this. That has made me who I am, but I can use this and I can move forward. And having that action, something that you can look and say, okay, this is what's gotten me to here, now how can I move forward? Having that step has been so crucial, at least for me, and I know a lot of other people.
I mean, I think it is critical, and I think it's really hard. There's nothing simple about that.
Nothing.
And it also, patience is really important. Patience with ourselves is important. Just as patience with other people is important. Like, we have to understand that, like, you're not just going to read a book or get a program and you're going to be fine. That's bullshit.
That's complete bullshit.
That's just not real. Like, what's real is, like, wrestling with our identities, understanding human condition and relationships, processing these things. And I really do think patience with ourselves, like, coming from a place where I don't think I was taught the greatest relationship with guilt and shame, for a multitude of reasons. I think as I began to at least dive into what I have in my own experience with psychology and guilt and shame, to me, guilt and shame is the opposite of patience with ourselves, because it means, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, like, try to be really intentional and get things done in terms of like being remorseful about things we do that hurt people or like things like that. That's like a different story. But like, I think when it comes down to it, like, if we're not patient with ourselves, like, we become laden with really heavy things that we want to solve. We're not going to solve those things quickly. It's very easy to say, very difficult to do. But I think being patient with ourselves in a process is really critical to just having mental stability, to giving yourself enough time, like healing after a relationship, healing after the loss of a friend. I've had this conversation with the loss of Ryan. I can't remember where I saw this article, but it talked about how when a close friend passes, how that's so different than like the other circumstances in our lives of like maybe older people in our family dying. Like, obviously sudden deaths are different, but like kind of deaths that would somewhat be considered natural life rather than something that's very sudden. And that it takes us between 4 to 6 years to truly process that, because we're like, if it's someone that's that close to us, like, they are gone now from here at least. And the practices of like healing from that, and like the patience of that process of healing, and then also like wanting to stay connected. Like, I still talk to Ryan. That's a practice that me and several of my friends through that process talk about, and how important that is to us. Like, when I go to the mountains and I go backcountry skiing and I get a moment, I share words with Ryan, because that's where I also feel connected to him in my process with that. And I think that that's something that's been really, really neat to me, is learning how to mourn, learning how to celebrate, learning how to be joyful, and understanding that all of those things we have to be patient with ourselves, because we're not going to know how to do that. The only way we know how to do something that works is by trying it and trying it and trying it. And I think that patience is so critical. That also rolls into like our external relationships, not just with ourselves, but with partner, with friends. Yeah, I think it's pretty critical. Sorry, I'm just going
That's
all over the place.
amazing.
I
That's
feel like
some
I
really
feel
great
like
insight.
I'm out in left field. So.
That's been some
You
incredible
reel me
insight.
in.
When it comes, so I'm debating about whether I want to go here. Yeah, we're gonna do it. So it seems like a lot of what you've gone through and a lot of how you've developed to who you are has been through this passing. I know Brian's passing was really, I want to say, monumental for you, and has really helped develop this reflection, develop this process of who you are. So what are your thoughts on like death and on the afterlife? Like what happens after? Yeah, just small talk today.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ryan passed in the summer of 2017. I had moved out to the small town. I'd been out there for a little over a year, off and on, and then had moved out there full time just a couple months before. And Ryan is a very important person to me, still is. And he was younger. He's about 4 years younger than me. We got introduced initially when we were in college. Actually, I'd overlapped. It took several extra years to get my college degree. School wasn't too easy on me. And I got introduced to him through my buddy Christian, and I didn't really see things as like a mentor relationship. We were just friends.
Yeah.
Like, Ryan is awesome and very engaged, very thoughtful, very much exploring things in the world and asking big questions, and was such a deep thinker. And through this process, it was a season of life, I would say, that kind of built to Ryan's death. He took his own life. It's obviously a very big topic of conversation in modern culture. Strangely, I had also, in about a 2-year span, personal people that I knew, 6 people had taken their lives. And it's like obviously like a social conversation that started happening. It's like, okay, awareness on mental health. We need to talk about this more. And I was kind of like, yeah, we do need to talk about it more. And this is happening all over the place too. It's not 3rd degree connections, 4th degree connections. It's 1st degree relationships. And it was just like, all those things are always shocking. They're not always surprising. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean they're not shocking.
Yeah.
Because we're human.
Yeah.
We hurt. We lose. It's so shocking and sudden. And no matter what someone's gone through or a journey you've walked through with them. And I think in some of the prep in that experience of having other people there, you're always kind of like, yeah, I mean, I knew that person, or that person was a work person, or yeah, through another relationship, and they knew them. And then it's like your best friend. Mm. And that is very shocking. And you just get leveled. That's what it was. I got leveled by that.
Yeah.
I remember the phone call that I got. I collapsed to the ground. I actually hurt a muscle in my abdominal muscle. I hurt it during the time because I collapsed from crying so deeply, because it was an immediate weight of losing someone that was so close to me. My parents are still living. I've lost great grandparents and some other people, and obviously family, but that's where this article that I was referencing about loss talked very specifically about losing a best friend and an intimate friend that knows so much about who you are. In knowing that you can't have those healing and loving conversations, and you can't process things, and you're not going to laugh together, and you're not going to touch each other, you're not going to be able to hug again, you're not going to be able to be in the same place, there are all these things that immediately you're flooded with that are just gone. And I think that began a process of even deeper reflection of my own life through the process of mourning and celebrating his life. I don't want to let that be absent. I think that in death, like we experience death in and out of our lives, and come in contact with a lot of people who, are experiencing death. And one of the, a lot of people like, it's so hard to know what to say to people when someone loses someone close to them. And it is. And I definitely don't have the answer for that. But what I have come to focus on when I hear of death, I let a person know, whether I'm like seeing them or just you shoot them a text, or like however we have to do that now, and just say like, this is awful, because it is. Death is awful. It's heartbreaking, and it's heartbreaking because like that being that we love so much is now absent from our reality in our presence. We don't get to enjoy them anymore. We don't get to do all of those things. And I usually, always, I say like, I hope that you can find healing in the mourning and in the celebration of that person's life, because we do have to heal. And that takes a lifetime, truly. Yeah. I think of for me, of anyone in my life who's passed and who has died, there are like, that we have like, if we have good memories and we have like things that we've stored away deep into our minds, like those memories and who they are with us forever, of our time in existence in reality. Like someone that comes to mind is my great grandfather, my mom's grandfather. Called him Pop. He passed when I was probably in my early teens. But I have all of these memories with him, and I went back and looked up a lot of history of his life and learned a lot about him that I feel like gave me a lot of insight into who he was as a person, that I didn't know him then. Obviously, this was decades ago. But like, I feel really connected to him still, because I also have things about him. I have like this crocheted piece that was made for him in his office where he worked in Chicago that I have on my wall now. Every time I see it, I get to be reminded of him. I have things from Ryan. Like in my process with Ryan, everyone descended on Chattanooga, Tennessee, where Ryan lived, and we went to kind of pack up his house and help his family transition things out of his space. And Ryan lived in this awesome community. It's called Glass Street. Like vibrant community of people who are awesome, artists, musicians, like daycares and community things and all this stuff going on in the city. It's so cool. And in doing so, we had also like met a lot of people who he had influenced through this wilderness therapy program he had started. It's called Bridge Chattanooga. I was on the kind of initial board, his board president, kind of helping him get some things off the ground with it for several years. It was really cool to see this process, but he wanted to create a wilderness therapy program for urban students who hadn't spent a lot of time in the wilderness to get out and experience nature and think and heal and process. And just, it's not about, I think, saying like, oh, it's these kids from these environments and they need X. It's more saying like, we all need this. And I see there to be a specific need here in this community and in communities surrounding this to have access to this. So he just did it himself in his mid-20s and just worked really hard to do that. And when we were cleaning out his house, I found one of his boards. It's kind of like a big billboard paper thing that he wrote notes on. He had principles from his program. And I have two of them tattooed now on my side. And it was really neat because it was in his handwriting. His handwriting's garbage. It looked awful. It's hilarious.
Did you get the tattoo in his handwriting?
Yeah. That's so amazing. But it was so powerful. Like we pulled this thing out and we were looking at it. It was like, oh, these are principles of the program. And the first principle of the program that he would like use to like talk to students about before is what they were going to do. He would say, this is an expedition. And I spend a lot of time outside. I like being in the mountains and in the woods. I feel very lucky to be able to do that. And the idea behind an expedition, it's kind of an intentional going out with like an objective in mind kind of thing. And, he was taking students out who were, like middle school, like adolescence, things like that. So like there's also like it's the season where you're kind of like forming all of the way that you look at the world. And so you'd start by that was a big thing for him, was this is an expedition. Like when we go out to the woods, whether it's just to go on a hike or whether we're going to play in a river or whatever we're doing, like intentionality is what he would drive, because that's who he was as an individual. He was deeply intentional, probably to a fault to some people. It's like, whoa, Ryan, intense, too intentional, cool it. But he was so good at it, and he was good at being very attentive to what people and the energy around him was. He could adapt and shift, and I think it's why he had so much influence, is like he was so thoughtful and so present. And then I had seen these principles and some things when he had originally done them, but one of the pieces that the next couple down was no future questions. Probably my favorite thing of his deal. So this is something that he taught to his students, and it was a rule. There are no future questions. Future question being, when will we get there? Where are we going? How are we doing it? Like all of these things related to like timelines, because he was teaching in the most basic way, but in such a meaningful way, to be present. And he was working to get kids who, like, there are some environments that some of these students would come from that are very unsettling, and it's rough. Like, we all have these certain experiences in our childhood, but like, lacking stability and just the challenges of like, honestly, modern culture, and being a kid. And he was training kids who were in like, 8, 9, 10 years old, 12 years old, 13 years old, to like be present. I was not taught that when I was 13 years old, or when I was 10 or 8 or anything. Like, I feel like I learned that in adulthood because of like psychologists who like wrote books. It's like, oh, okay. And he was doing this, and he had a bachelor's degree in psychology. He was not he wasn't a licensed therapist. He didn't get have a master's degree, like a basic bachelor's degree in understanding psychology. And I think like in processing and being present after his death and being influenced, ironically, like I was being influenced by who he was in his death. And that had a lot of transformational meaning to me. And it was deeply transformational. It was also very challenging. It was deeply emotional. It was so much to heal and so much to process, but also so much to be grateful for. Not to sound weird about being grateful. If there's anything I could change in my like life right now, I would love to be able to scoop him back, wind back time. Can't do that. I heard an interview actually recently with Stephen Colbert where he's talking about something similar to this, where he says, it's like talking about how he's grateful for things that have happened, but it doesn't have to mean that he's okay with the things that happened. And I'm not okay with having lost Ryan. I'm not okay that he took his life. I'm not okay that he's gone. Going back to what we talked about earlier, what's in our control and what's out of our control. That circumstance is not in my control. What is in my control is what I do about it. And what I let influence. And I've continually let Ryan's being influence who I am, because who he was is amazing. And it's a person I strive to be. And I think that as that experience, and that's one experience with death, causes you to be deeply reflective about life and to really start to get real about what matters, what has value, what's important to me, what do I want to do, what do I care about. And I think that his death was a complement to what processes I was beginning in life. And that's really difficult for me to say, because I would do anything to change that. But I have to accept the reality of that, and I have to choose what to do in moving forward. And I choose to celebrate his life, choose to be influenced by who he was. And this is not easy and I'm not good at it, but try to be present and try to, so those are the two things in my tattoo, or this is an expedition, because that gets me stoked and gets me excited about everything, being kind of intentional, and whether it's relationships or work or anything, and no future questions. Like, am I working on living that as well? Because being in the present is one of the ways that we know from a mental health standpoint or physical standpoint that we can care for ourselves, and that we can like experience the world around us. So I think like going in that in terms of death, and death is an ultimate reality, and it's one of our guarantees, right, in life. It's kind of like, okay, as we come into consciousness, we realize that death is inevitable. Doesn't mean we have to like it necessarily, but as with most things that are inevitable, it helps if we're willing to understand it the best that we can. I think that if there's anything that has like I guess it would be like a negative byproduct, it would be like knowing that something is ultimate reality, or knowing something that is a part of reality and choosing to ignore it or suppress it, or act like it's not there. And not that that's simple. Death, I am afraid of dying. I don't know what's next. I know what people whom I love very much believe is next. I know a lot of people who are confused about what next. I know a lot of people who believe nothing about what's next. Like, right? It's like this massive spectrum of like what comes next. And I honestly, like, not to not answer your question, I don't know. That is my answer to that, because we don't. I know what people believe. I know that there are some things that I do believe, but I do not know. I think that's critical.
It's a very critical difference there.
It is. And I had a friend, one of my closest friends, Mikey, he helped me understand this. Some people in my network will probably be very bothered by this, but it was very insightful to me. And he just said, when it comes to like the afterlife, and when it comes to like what's next, I find it to be incredibly arrogant when people say they know what it is. I was like, yeah, I can get on board with that. I don't think that everyone's being arrogant who believes in something after life. That's not. I think it's when it's like, this is it. I know it is this. Believe this. Do this. It's like, okay, but that's pretty limiting, and that doesn't really allow ourselves to say like, what are some other perspectives on that to begin to think about a large spectrum. Like, I feel like oftentimes influences like that come from an immediate community or family or extension.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
And we need to have greater perspectives. It doesn't mean people shouldn't maintain and continue their belief structure. I'm not saying that in any way. I think I am so grateful for the people that I have in my life who believe different things. Because if it wasn't for them, I would not have the perspective I have of the world. And I also wouldn't have, like right now, I've been going through some health things. We've talked about this a little bit. I was diagnosed with, it's called IgA nephropathy. It's a kidney disease. And it's, it's a medical condition, whatever, it doesn't matter. But one of the things, and this is about spirituality, it's not really about death, but it's kind of about how we're living now and how the influence of people around us have now. It has been so meaningful to me to have people, as I've like shared with them, and people are saying like, I am praying for you. I think in times of my life, I would have been bothered by that. In times of my life, I would have been bothered by that because I was going through my own transformational experience, and I was like, okay, like just need to like ease up on that. Give me a couple years, which I've tried to give myself, and I am so grateful for that. Like, that is so meaningful to me. It is so thoughtful, and it is so loving. Now, some people, it might be bullshit. Some people might just be saying it and not actually doing that. It doesn't matter, though. Like, what is prayer? Like prayer is a lot of different things to different people. So like the fact that someone is saying like, I am thinking about you, I am considering you in what you're going through, that is so thoughtful. Like, and whether it's through prayer, whether it's through just thinking, like whenever it's that like we're being thought of, that is like so powerful to me. And I think that those things connect to aspects of spirituality in the afterlife. A lot of that comes from like a culture that I was raised in terms of like modern Orthodox Christianity, and people kind of, you know, saying like we pray because our words and our thoughts move to God. This is their perspective. And, you know, in doing so, God cares for people. I don't really know. I don't know how to explain what I believe about God. I want to believe in God. I do, no matter how it comes down to it, I do believe in God.
Just what that looks like.
Yeah, what that is though, I don't know about that. Like, I don't know why God would have a gender. I don't know, and maybe these are things that are like, oh, I'm so liberal by thinking these things. I don't know. Like, I don't, that's not my intention, and I don't care about that. I think it's just more of like the way that I begin to reflect and like think about the things that I was raised believing and what I believe now, is that like God doesn't have to be a gender. There doesn't have to be certain things. Now, obviously, people have like biblical theological perspectives on that. That's different, because like there's also a lot of theologies about how to interpret the Bible, just like there are a lot of theologies about how to interpret the Quran, and like other religious texts and things like that. Like, yes, there's like a lot of ways to interpret these things. Where I've come from and the world I've lived in and what I've experienced, I have met people all over the world who believe so many different things about what happens in our lives after death. What, you know, what means, what is a meaningful death? What, you know, what is like, what happens? And I had this experience one time that I will forever be grateful for. I had like a layover in Dubai, which is like a very modern city, kind of fabricated, still cool, but it's like fabricated. I was flying through and decided to like walk around, and it was on a Friday, so there was a call to worship and teaching from the mosques, and I approached someone who was going into the mosque, and there were like people everywhere going in. I didn't know a lot about Islam at the time. And I just said, hey, like, I've never been in a mosque. Can I come in and like experience this Friday worship teaching? I didn't know what's going on. I don't know a lot. I didn't know a lot about it. And he was like, yeah, absolutely. Come on in and sit in the back. I sat down. It was very moving, incredible. Thousands of people. And these teachings are happening, and prayers. And afterwards I ended up getting, like, people were kind of wondering why I was there. It was actually kind of intimidating, and I was kind of being surrounded by people after who were like, what are you doing here? Like, you're not dressed appropriately, certain things. And I was like, oh gosh, like, and because I hate, like, in all of my experiences of going to different parts of the world and meeting so many people, like, cultural relevance and being aware of yourself is very important to me. Not standing out is very important to me. Like, I definitely don't want to be the center of attention. I kind of want to just be blended in.
Yeah.
And this was very much a not blended in circumstance. And I was taken out to lunch by kind of one of the people in leadership, and we had hours of conversation. It was incredible. And I just got to talk. This is where I'm from, certain perspectives of where I was, how I was raised, and the way people tend to look at different environments in the Middle East, and the culture and the religion. And it was an amazing conversation. Very life-changing to me in terms of thinking about the way I see the world. So we were together for like 6 hours. It was crazy. They like treated me to lunch. They took me out. They bought me this like awesome outfit. I just felt like really taken care of, and like really the hospitality was like incredible. Of course, it's like pretty much everywhere, where you go. And who you experienced. But at the end of the conversation was the most powerful part. I've been talking about these things. At first he was like, oh, are you here to convert to Islam? And I'm like, no. But like, here's how I see the world. I would like to hear how you see the world. We talked. At the end of the night, it was really awesome because he had been talking. It's kind of so much about in the early stage of the conversation, hours before, it had felt very like influential. Like, oh, you're here to convert. Like you're here to find out what you need to do to convert and what that means. By the end of the conversation, at the end of the night, he said, Austin, I'm going to continue to pray for you in your life. I'm not going to pray that you convert to Islam or a different religion. I'm going to pray that you seek truth. And that's how we like ended the conversation.
Wow.
And they took me to the airport, like so gracious and so hospitable. And it was so meaningful to me to be told by someone, especially in an environment I grew up in where like, you know, converting people to the faith that you believe in is a priority to a lot of people. I don't have any criticism of that. That's not true. I have criticism of that, but like, it's people doing their thing. So like, all right. This was like, it was just so powerful to have that experience. So I think like, you know, as I reflect on death and I think about this, even in the midst of my own fears or my own unknowns, I'm really grateful that there are experiences like that in my life that challenge the way that I think about what's next in terms of our consciousness and reality. Because I feel like the people that I've been able to experience around the world have had great influence on the way that I see reality here and on the ways that I anticipate the reality of what's after this life.
Wow.
So I don't know what happens, and I'm really comfortable saying that because I know that I believe that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. On that note, I think we can call this.
Great.
Austin, it has been such a pleasure. This
It's a
was
good
an
time.
absolute blast.
Yeah, man. Thanks.
Thank you.
Awesome.